Die Frau ohne Schatten. Father Lee.
Thank you, Peter Allen. How does an opera lover who knows no Freud or Jung or Joseph Campbell find a way through the labyrinth of symbols in Die Frau ohne Schatten, The Woman Without a Shadow? One way is to see this 20th century opera as a variant of a much older opera everyone knows, Mozart's The Magic Flute. When Hugo von Hofmannsthal first broached the subject of Die Frau excitedly to Richard Strauss, he said that it would be their magic flute, much as the Rosenkavalier they had written was their Marriage of Figaro. Hofmannsthal knew that he and Strauss could not recreate what he called Mozart's enchanting naivete. In the Magic Flute, Mozart had made a childlike wonderland from the myths of many civilizations. Hofmannsthal wanted, with Strauss's music, to make a mythic universe for adults, a great symbolic drama with epic yearnings. A new magic flute, yes, but, as the librettist said, it would be a matter not of imitation, but analogy. So, as the Magic Flute has two loving couples, a prince and a princess, and a birdman and a birdwoman, Die Frau also has two couples, the lordly emperor and his empress, and the low-born dyer and his wife. As the action in the Magic Flute is spun on by the patriarchal Sarastro, so the strange events in Die Frau are manipulated by the unseen but always present father, Kaikobad. As the Magic Flute in the end consigns the matriarchal Queen of the Night to perdition, so Die Frau banishes a similar figure, the nurse. And as the last half of the Magic Flute is a series of ritualized tests for its two couples, so, with the second act of Die Frau, Hofmannsthal said, now the testing begins, and all four must be purified. To make his vast drama of world mythology, Hofmannsthal borrowed not just from the Magic Flute, but, to cite only a few examples, from the Bible. The opera's characters paraphrase bits of the Gospels and the Apocalypse. From the Roman poet Ovid, the woman without a shadow has the power of metamorphosis. From the Koran, the woman with a shadow is tempted by an Ifrit, a genie in the form of a young man. From the Arabian Nights, the spirits of humans sing through the fish frying in a pan. And from world folk tale, the man wedded to a spirit will turn to stone if his wife does not, in 12 moons, bear a child. Hofmannsthal also culled features from Omar Khayyam, who provided the character of Kaikobad, from Gozzi's Turandot, which has both Kaikobad and the dyer, Barak, and from Goethe's Faust. Hofmannsthal himself remarked on the similarity between his evil nurse and Goethe's Mephistopheles. The librettist also added symbols of his own, most notably the shadow itself. So complex did his story and his symbols become that he felt the need eventually to expand and explain them in a novella. Incredibly, only one chapter of this indispensable par ergon has been translated into English, and that's a word to a wise publisher somewhere. You can read more about the novella in a piece by Stephen R. Cerf in the Frau ohne Schatten issue of Opera News. The characters of Die Frau ohne Schatten are defined in some of the most enigmatic poetry written in this century, and in some of Strauss's most challenging music. Let me play the musical themes for the 6 main characters in turn. First, there is the spirit king who never appears, but who is so important to the action that his name is announced instrumentally 3 times in the opera's opening measures. Kaikobad. Kaikobad is a father god presiding over a 3-part world. First, There is the spirit world at the top of the moon mountains, in which he lives with those not yet born. This pre-existence of the soul was a Platonic idea that haunted Hofmannsthal all his life. Then there is an earth world far below, a place of struggling humanity, of passion and compassion. And there is the world in which the opera began, a kind of limbo halfway between heaven and earth, an island set in a lake surrounded by moon mountains. From above, Kaikobad predestines all that happens in the mid and the lower worlds. But he also allows lower creatures the acts of free will that eventually save or doom them. He calls to judgment with ringing fanfares. He can also issue commands that at first appear fearful. He will allow his fairy daughter to learn the meaning of human love, but if she does not find a shadow, the man she loves will be turned to stone. Wird zu Stein. Our second figure, the daughter of Kaikobad, is a fairy-like creature. Her mother, about whom we hear tantalizingly little, has given her a tender feeling for the lower forms of life, and so her father has let her descend to the middle world with a talisman whereby she can assume in sky or lake or land any shape she pleases, bird or fish or animal. So it was as a white gazelle on the moon mountains that she was caught by an emperor, and when she left the gazelle's body, she turned again to fairy form, and the emperor loved her and made her his empress. But then the falcon that brought them together flew off with the talisman, leaving her stranded in the interworld. She remains a spirit creature in that world, a woman without a shadow. As her four-note theme suggests, the light passes through her as if through rock crystal. Sometimes the light is refracted upwards in a related five-note phrase. Strauss is famous for his operatic portraits of women, but with Die Frau he was amazed that for the first time he found it easier to characterize the men in his story. Our next figure, the passionate emperor of the Southeast Islands, gets the most memorable theme in the score. But that ardent love is without issue. The emperor selfishly keeps his fairy-like empress far from the human race she so longs to know, and he has wounded the falcon that brought them together. A year later, the blood still drips from its wings. It weeps as it sings to him. The emperor cannot hear the words in the falcon's cry, but the warning that if his wife does not find a shadow, he will soon turn to stone, a mythic symbol of his selfishness. But the empress, with her spirit nature, can understand the song, and she descends from the middle to the lower world to find the shadow that will save her emperor. The longest role in the opera is that of the nurse. sent by Kaikobad to accompany his daughter in her search for a shadow. A demonic figure with magic powers, the nurse owes something to the witches and evil stepmothers of folklore. But she is more complex than they. Like Goethe's Mephistopheles, like Milton's Satan, she becomes the unwitting instrument of good, allowed by Kaikobad to do evil so that the human race may progress towards understanding. Her theme is eerie and elusive, scarcely noticeable, quietly menacing. The search for a shadow in the lowest world brings us to our last two characters, the most heartrending of all, the dyer and his wife. He, the only character who knows human love, is also the only human character with a name, Barak, a Muslim word for saint. The orchestra lingers lovingly over his love for others. The English word dyer doesn't quite convey the force of the German Färber, that is to say, one who imparts colors. Hofmannsthal casts man on earth as a dyer to illustrate what is perhaps the most recurrent theme in all his poems and prose, das Allomatisches, transformation worked through the influence of another. Barak's love has the power to transform. Hofmannsthal made this clear in his novella, where we see, in a vision of what a world transformed by saintliness might be, the three brothers of Barak freed of their deformities. And Strauss, once again, surprisingly more at home with his male than with his female figures, shows the transforming power of the dyer's love by giving him a third-act aria of unparalleled eloquence. He chose for this his most expressive key, D-flat, the key of the trio in Rosenkavalier, the lullaby in Ariadne, and the violin and soprano duet Und die Seele unbewacht in the four last songs. But even Barak needs the testing Kaikobad will send. His love has not transformed, in fact it has all but destroyed the most remarkable character in the opera, she who is called simply the dyer's wife. A strange woman, Hofmannsthal first said of her, with a very beautiful soul, incomprehensible in her anguish, yet sympathetic. She is the flawed human figure most of us can identify with. She is what most of us are. Strauss gives this woman no real theme of her own. Mostly he shows her tormented by her husband's yearning for children. And tormented too by the voices of the unborn children themselves, crying out, those Kinderlein. That brings us to the opera's central symbol, the shadow. Clearly in the narrative it signifies the ability to bear children. The shadow is the potential child in the womb. But as the opera gathers force, the shadow comes to mean something more, something close to what André Malraux called the human condition. Suffering, vulnerability, love, guilt, death. Those are what the woman without a shadow, the Empress, does not know, and what the woman with a shadow, the dyer's wife, knows all too well and is ready to give away. When the crystal Empress comes to know firsthand the human condition and to respect it, when in the last act she cries, "Ich will nicht," I will not take the shadow from that other woman if it means the loss of her humanity, then Kaikobad, like all the father gods who will their children into human flesh, takes pity on her. He sends her the shadow she has earned by her selflessness. In a shaft of light, it floods across the stage to touch her, a symbol not just of the children she will have, but of her awareness of pain, guilt, death, and love, all of the things in human nature she wanted to understand, all the things the shadow means. Her emperor, saved by her selflessness, sings, "When the crystal heart shatters in a cry, the unborn come hurrying, shining like stars," and we hear the voices of the children he and his wife will have. I've spoken here as if it were Kaikobad alone who was providentially arranging all this. But in Hofmannsthal's novella, it gradually becomes clear that the unborn children are a force in the drama too, and at the heart of the drama, giving it meaning. In the novella, the emperor even speaks with his unborn children, 3 boys and a girl. By the time it reached the stage in 1919, Die Frau ohne Schatten had become a poem of hope after a whole generation of young men had been lost on both sides in the Great War. A war in which Hofmannsthal was still young enough to be called up for military service, if not quite to the battlefield. In 1919, the hope of Europe and of the world lay in the children through whom those young dead would live again to build the peace. There are those who say that this symbolic opera can have no meaning today in a world dangerously overpopulated. But Die Frau is not concerned with mere propagation. Its meaning is that any hope for the future rests in our children, learning from us what it is to be human and how to love one another. Hofmannsthal was, as Patrick J. Smith says in The 10th Muse, the greatest librettist of love. Love, he says, in its widest sense, as a blend of compassion, friendship, and understanding, expressed at its most perfect in the marriage union between mature individuals and in the consequent creation of a family. Love with its roots in the ethic of the magic flute. Have we time then for one last enigmatic symbol? The falcon. At the end of Hofmannsthal's novella, required reading for a full understanding of the remarkable piece we are hearing today, the dyer and his wife return to earth in a boat illuminated with all the colors of creation, and the falcon reappears to circle benignly over the emperor and his empress. The second or the third time you make your way through this opera, see if you agree with me that the compassionate, wounded, weeping falcon just might be, in Metamorphosis, that most important single figure in the opera's vast mythology, Kaikobad himself, leading his subjects onward to meet their destinies. Kaikobad, not fearful in his omnipotence, but a loving father stricken with sorrow for us in the world below, weeping for us who must suffer so in order to find what true happiness is.
That was Father Owen Lee, who accompanied himself at the Yamaha.